Well, what if we actually knew the lessons that we should be applying, but we're absolutely failing to do that? It's a serious question. This is the 10th International Lessons Learned Conference. I've been to a few of them before, and it's, I think, very heartening to see that we keep coming back. There's a motto in the lessons learned world that it's better to learn from other people's mistakes than to learn from them yourselves. And so it's great to come together and to get so many different perspectives. I work at the Australian Civil Military Centre. We've been in existence now for 9 years, and our job is to build government capability, whole of government capability to work together for offshore operations. And I'm quite lucky coming here at the end of the day. What they said, I fully endorse, and I'm going to actually parachute a bit off what has been said already. I particularly appreciate the keynote address that Welby gave when he spoke about the move into post-heroic leadership and talking about leadership from the point of influence. You can take that as said as being the key point that I want to make today. I then want to jump to the so what. What does that mean for us in government? Now, I should say up front, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't even have a speech. What I did do is something I haven't done for a good many years. I did an academic-style paper, and I'm effectively going to talk to that. So I have copies of that paper with me, and I've uploaded it on the internet, and I'd be very happy to have an ongoing engagement with you about the nature of that paper. But in my brief time here, I want to chunk up my discussion into 3 points. I want to talk a little bit about the problem of professionalising the public sector workforce in the digital age. And I think we've had some great leads-ins there, and Rachel, I think, gave some great points there. I also want to talk about this thing known as the integrated approach, which many of you, particularly those who've been through Staff College, will know as the comprehensive approach. And I want to talk about what we're learning from where it's applying in countries that are doing it well. And finally, I want to make some short reference to the work that we've done in Lessons Learned, specifically focusing in on the lessons that we have deliberately learned from Australian operations, whole of government operations in Afghanistan. And you will see that we've distributed the published version of that document. I believe there's some more copies here, and I think it's probably a good place for us to start because we've learnt an awful lot through that process. The first point I'd make in terms of the professionalisation of the workforce is a fairly punchy one. The British Minister for the Cabinet Office recently released the British Civil Service Workforce Plan. It's a great document, get hold of it. And when he released it, he said, no longer should we take people with no experience of an area or job and throw them in at the deep end because they have a gap in their experience. Gone are the days of the gifted amateur. Today's world is too complex and the demands too high. He went on to point out that digitisation had fundamentally changed the way that we did business, that big data is here to stay. But he also qualified that by saying that any particular technology in operations is only a tiny part of the solution, maybe 10%. 90% is about culture, training, and human behaviour. And every single presentation I've heard today has emphasised that point. So we have fundamentally changed the way we do business with digitisation, but the reality is that the 90% whereby we take advantage of that, where it becomes a war winner or it becomes something that's critical in terms of disaster response, is going to be about how we organise ourselves. And that brings me back to the question I made first off. What if we knew what we should be doing, but we were very constrained in doing it? And I really endorse what Rachel had to say there about radical devolution. Many of you may have come across General Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. If you haven't, again, it's a book that I'd strongly encourage that you read. It's not particularly new. It actually drags on a lot of themes of contemporary thinking, specifically adaptive leadership, that Professor Ronald Heifetz from the Harvard Business School has been pushing now for almost 30 years. And it's that notion of leading from the ground up. But it's something I think that would be recognisable to any of us who've worked in the operational environment, particularly when you're dealing in complex operations that may run the gamut from disaster response, governance reform, stabilisation, reconstruction. Oh, and by the way, you're fighting a kinetic war at the same time. There's a lot of that going on. It's not going away. It's going to characterise the rest of our careers. General McChrystal spoke about the problems that he faced of complete data overload in Afghanistan, where despite having perfect situational awareness in terms of the amount of information that was coming through, instantaneous communications across the network of organisations that he commanded, that actions actually took longer than they did in the old days. And that was largely because with instantaneous communications, everything had to be referred all the way up the chain so that things get done. We talk a lot about the strategic corporal, but we also talk about the tactical minister. And don't we know the characteristic of so many leaders, senior leaders, to want to lead in and manage the business? Stop it. It's got to stop, and it's got to stop now. So this notion of adaptive leadership and radical devolution is very, very important. Again, I would say have a look at the British Civil Service Workforce Plan. It's only a short document. I think it's only about 27 odd pages, but it's focused on the people piece. And it's pointed out that in the British government of the future, we are going to have to professionalise. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to come to the job with wadges of academic qualifications. In fact, in many ways, it means that we have to be more flexible and adaptable, make do with what we have in terms of our workforce, but invest a great deal more in through-life development and preparedness. It is about investing, and it is about changing the way we do business. I've had a lot of grief in the Australian government in pushing this particular line, and it's because I deal with good people. In the military, they refer to iron colonels or iron majors. I often find that it's the iron SES Band 1, SES Band 2 in the civil service. And the thing is that these are good people. They're working incredibly hard in their day-to-day lives. They have got a brief, they've got a job to do, but unfortunately they can't get their head up out of what they're doing. And that's where the silos are fundamentally entrenched. So the people who push back when we come and say, have we got ideas for you on how we can make this work better, are often going to be those overworked people who their leaders are not investing in getting their head out of the particular job they're doing and teaching them how to learn to trust their workforces. Civil service workforces, and when I say that, I refer to not only public servants, but emergency responders, police, and the military, have a whole range of capabilities. They're extraordinary people there. The people we have now are so extraordinary in terms of the knowledge and the abilities they bring to the job. Have they got everything? No. So how can we get them ready for the sorts of operations that are coming our way, the sort of work that is coming our way? We've got to actually ensure that our people are trained. And in many workforces, not the military, but certainly in the public service workforce, training can be a dirty word, because if you need to be trained, it suggests that you're somehow not good at your job. But we need to do more interagency training, and we're starting to see that. In Australia, we've founded something called the National Security College, and the entire national security sector, public and private, state and federal, come together in this college, and they've got an array of courses and programs at an array of different levels. It's a way of cementing common understanding across government. Again, it's only 9 years old, but it's really hitting home runs. we do exercises together, and we should be doing more exercises together. And we've been fundamentally transformational, I think, in the way that we have built whole of government capability, because we've built these understandings and these linkages through complex exercises. Now, reality is never going to be the last exercise that you did, but by throwing people curly questions, by throwing them together, by making them work with other agencies, by making them understand what the mandates and the missions and the language and the way of doing things are, then exercises really pay off. I have here with me a colleague, Amanda Coughlin, will be giving a presentation tomorrow. She's going to drill into the nitty-gritty of what we're doing in the interagency space, and I highly commend the presentation she's going to give to you. And she has actually, and her team, have a small team working in a small organisation in a small country town just outside Canberra, have effected a major change in the way that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade do business. They never did exercises before, and if they were drafted into military exercises, it was effectively as training aids for the military, and they went along and they grumped for a couple of weeks and then went back to their day jobs. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has now turned around and incorporated in its way of doing things a capability preparedness plan where they will identify how they are going to use exercises to build their own understanding of their relationship in whole of governments and their ability to respond to different things. So that's the cultural piece. I'd like to just highlight the integrated approach as applied by the British, and I'll read to you a statement on what integration is, and it comes from the British Stabilisation Unit, which is a counterpart organisation of ours in the UK. Again, it's a real agent for change in the British system, and I do think, and pardon the British people in this room, you probably won't recognise yourself, but looking in from outside, I'd say that the best practice that we're seeing applied at the moment in this area of civil-military coordination is certainly conceptually coming from the British. But the British Stabilisation Unit writes that integration is primarily driven by the process of people from different institutions and different disciplines working side by side at several levels to ensure that their perspectives and activities reinforce each other. Integration requires low-level cooperation, mid-level coordination, supplemented by high-level alignment of overall strategic objectives. Integration should improve the flow of information, contribute to a shared understanding of challenges and responses, reduce policy and delivery silos, and ensure greater effect on the ground. I love that. High-level alignment of overall strategic objectives, mid-level coordination, and low-level cooperation. And if you look at our Afghan lessons learned document, that's fundamentally what we've learned from over a decade or so in Afghanistan, where we went in with an initial military response, which was retrospectively geared as a whole-of-government response with the civilian surge of 2009. And it was not the way to do things, but ultimately our conclusion is that we effectively got there. And why we did get there at the end of the day was our appreciation that there needed to be a whole-of-government policy lead, and that couldn't come from the existing organisation because the subject matter expertise wasn't there. You can't go to the National Security Committee of Cabinet. Let's face it, most people in Cabinet are lawyers or political advisors or trade union officials. This isn't the work that they do. They may only have a few hours of considering what the objectives, the strategic policy objectives of a particular offshore deployment is going to be. It's not going to come from the secretaries of the departments and the Chief of the Defence Force necessarily, because they've got day jobs, they've got work to do. So you need policy guidance, and you need to come up with some sort of governance system that's going to enable you to have policy coordination across the spectre. And that's going to change according to the nature of the emergency. So we've got a couple of suggestions in our paper as to how that might be achieved. But the policy, the theory is the thing. it really doesn't matter how you do it as long as it's done. We do need then to step down and look at the cross-agency coordination. And again, we need to listen to what Rachel's talking about here. Radical devolution, building tiger teams, and there's been a lot of writing about that in our respective governments. Professor Peter Shergold, who is the past Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet in Australia, has written extensively on what we need to do here, and again there are references in my paper. But he talks about the creation of cross-government tiger teams that can be thrown in at particular problems. And we're seeing quite a lot of that. In fact, in our Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet at the moment, which is a central coordinating agency, they are building up task forces to address particular issues, and they bring people in from across government. It's an early experiment, but I think it's an idea whose time has come. And then finally, in the field, we need to look at tactical cooperation. We need to start seeing ourselves as, in our case, Team Australia. And again, we're starting to see that. Going back almost 20 years now, Bougainville, the Solomons, Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan, we have a generation of people, and dare I say a generation younger than me, who have extraordinary operational experience, and we can't afford to lose that experience. One of the things we are finding as we look at that generation, they want to come home. They want to have their families settle down and build their lives. So it's really incumbent upon us now to look to the next generation. And to do that, if we don't have the live operational experience and the hard-won experience of conducting operations in the field, then we really need to look at exercises, education and training and learning. We need to become better learning organisations. Well, that's my address for the day. I'm really looking forward to the next few days. As I said, I have a paper here which I'm very happy to share, and I commend you for all your efforts. Thank you.